Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bible Reading Plan. My name's Skylar, and today we're going to be in Acts 22. A little bit behind the scenes here. Paul is in Jerusalem to spread the gospel, as Paul does. And some of the Jews from Asia figured out who he was, kind of noticed who he was. Caused a big fuss. Paul ends up getting arrested. And when they're on their way to take him inside, he says, "No, I'm a citizen of Tarsus." So they give him the floor to speak. And this is where Acts 22 starts. He says, "Brothers and esteemed fathers, listen to me as I offer my defense." When they heard him speaking in their own language, the silence was even greater. So, they all think he's this outsider coming, and then he stands up and he starts speaking in the same language as these people, because that's where he's from. He says, "I'm a Jew born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, and I was brought up and educated here in Jerusalem under Gamaliel." And that's like, he was like the top dog. He's who you wanted to be taught under. If you're going to be taught under anybody, that's who you wanted to be taught under. So he's from Jerusalem, really. He was taught under this, and he goes on to kind of explain who he is. And Paul used to be Saul, and he was the top of the top, and he oversaw the execution of Christians. And he's basically talking about, "I persecuted the followers of the way, hounding some to death, arresting both men and women, and throwing them into prison. The high priest and the whole council of elders can testify to this. For I received letters from them to our Jewish brothers in Damascus, authorizing me to bring the followers of the way from there to Jerusalem in chains to be punished." So he's talking about, he did this at the highest level. He was the prosecutor of Christians. And when he says the way, it's capital W, because before Christianity was Christianity, it was the way. That's how they described what they are. And so he's talking about Christians here. He persecuted Christians at the highest level, men and women. He did it better than anybody else. And he was, pointing back to the resources. The high priest can testify to this. And then he goes through how he was saved and appointed to share the gospel and completely changed 180. He says, "As I was on the road approaching Damascus about noon, a very bright light from heaven suddenly shone down on me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' Saul says, 'Who are you, Lord?' And the voice replied, 'I am Jesus the Nazarene, the one you were persecuting.' The people with Paul saw the light, but they didn't understand the voice speaking. The Lord told Paul, 'Get up and go to Damascus, and there will you be told everything you are to do.'" So he kind of tells his testimony here. Like, I was on the road to go kill some Christians, go persecute, chain them up, kill them, basically. And there Jesus stops him in his tracks and turned him 180. In all this, Paul ended up being blinded, and he ended up going to a man named Ananias. And Ananias was also kind of like Paul. He was a godly man, and he was regarded by all the Jews. He was like a godly man. He did everything he was supposed to. He followed the law, all that. And then Ananias says to Paul, "The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and see the righteous one, and to see the righteous one and hear him speak. For you are to be his witness, telling everyone what you've seen and heard. What are you waiting for? Get up and be baptized. Have your sins washed away by calling on the name of the Lord." So here we go. We see that Paul is baptized, and his sins are washed away and forgiven, as Jesus describes in his ministry. And when Paul returned to Jerusalem, he was praying in the temple, and he fell into a trance. And he saw a vision of Jesus again. And Jesus said, "Hurry, leave Jerusalem, for the people here won't accept your testimony about me." Which shows kind of, the people who are in this bubble they don't want to hear what you have to say because they knew you before and they know you now, and maybe it's just not going to work for them. They're not going to believe you, whatever the reason was. And Paul argues with the Lord here. He says, they certainly know that at every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believed in you, and I was in complete agreement with you when your witness Stephen was killed. I stood by and kept the coats they took off when they stoned him. But then Jesus says to Paul, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. And then the crowd listened until Paul said that word. Then they began to shout, away with such fellow, he isn't fit to live. They yelled and they threw off their coats and tossed handfuls of dust in the air. So here we are. This shows why Jesus wanted Paul to go be with the Gentiles, because these people sat and listened when he started speaking in their language. They all sat and listened to Paul talk, listened to what he had to say. But the moment he said something that went severely out of their tradition, out of their we're God's only chosen people, nobody can be saved but us kind of mentality there, they sent him away. And this kind of mindset applies still in Christianity today. It's kind of taking its root in Christianity and not just with the Jews, that, if you don't do a certain thing or be a certain way, if you're not one of our stereotypical people, then be gone. I mean, that's a large thing in Christianity nowadays, which Paul kind of lived the life of both sides of it. For example, like he was one of the Christians that was like, oh, if you do this or say this or wear these things or have these markings or whatnot, don't come here, you're not welcome. We're going to persecute you here, to being changed himself and going unto the Gentiles, which he'd always been taught were these horrible, no good, dirty, rotten people that would never make it into the kingdom of heaven, and preach the gospel to them. And, that same thing happens today. People who don't look the right way or wear the right things, or, their hair's a little bit too long in the back, we fall into this temptation to just be like, oh no, you don't look like us, go away. But instead we should be like Paul, and welcome and invite and share the gospel, because Christ has love for all people. So, and then it goes down to, the commander just kind of was like, okay, well, they want him dead. They obviously don't like what he had to say. So they pulled him inside and ordered him to be lashed with whips and to make him confess his crime. And the commander wanted to find out why the crowd had become so furious. And in verse 25 it says, when they tied Paul down to lash him, Paul said to the officer standing there, is it legal for you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't ever been tried? And when the officer heard this, he went to the commander and asked, what are you doing? This man's a Roman citizen. So basically they had a little thing here because Paul he was a Roman citizen, and they never tried him. They just kind of was like, these people were like, oh, we want to get rid of him. So they tied him down and were going to lash him, but he'd never been tried for anything he did. So the commander went to Paul and said, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? Paul said, yes. And the commander said, I am too, and it cost me plenty. And Paul answered, but I'm a citizen by birth. So the soldiers who were about to interrogate Paul quickly withdrew, and when he heard that, and the commander was frightened because he had ordered him bound and whipped with no trial. So the next day, the commander ordered the leading priest into a session with the Jewish High Council. He wanted to find out what the trouble was all about. So he released Paul to have him stand before the council. So in that last little bit, it's just kind of going over, Paul being a Roman citizen, and they were going to, tie him up, bind him, and whip him. But he got out of it because, of course, you can't go beat somebody with no trial. It's not legal. and afraid of what the consequences for them might be. The guards the commander let him go. The guards backed off. They sent him before the High Council for the High Council to do their thing, so that way they have a trial, a verdict, and all that. And that's the end of Acts chapter 22. I hope you enjoyed it. I encourage you to come back tomorrow to go through chapter 23 and kind of figure out how this story ends, how it goes. It's an interesting little timeline here. There's a lot to be gotten out of it. There's a lot to break down. So I hope you come back and just keep following along with us. Really enjoy it. Hope you guys have a blessed day. We'll see you next time.